May 28th meeting of the Zoning Committee. My name is Matt Westmoreland. I am the chair of this committee. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmembers Hillis, Shook, Dozier, and Overstreet. I will make a motion to adopt the agenda. Second by Dozier. Mr. Hillis, how do you vote? Aye. Mr. Shook? Aye. Ms. Overstreet? Aye. Aye. 5 yeas, 0 nays. The agenda is adopted. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Second by Councilmember Hillis. Mr. Shook? Aye. Dozier? Aye. Overstreet? 5 yeas, 0 nays. The minutes are approved. Next on the agenda is public comment. I will say at the outset that per state law, we cannot hear comment from the public for items that have gone before the Zoning Review Board. So Ms. Holliday, you are first on our list, but your topic is Z2504. And we are not going to be able to take any public comment about that specific item.
Process, not content.
Process, not content. In that case, you have 3 minutes.
I am Carol Holliday. I understand that speakers are not to discuss the specifics of cases before you. Instead, I would like to address the process around Z2504, the administrative variance. The legislation before you today is not what was shared and discussed at the NPUs, nor what was voted on by the ZRB. Even the headings are different and summarize different changes to the zoning ordinance. Previously, it applied only to side yard setback, now applies to all setbacks, previously applied to only priority trees.
Ms. Holliday, I'm being advised by our law department that we are veering too much into content land.
Then I will go to the next paragraph.
Okay.
To allow amendments to the zoning code to move forward without a hearing on the content presented to the public is a disservice and a breach of due process. It is no less than bait and switch. I hope that you will not vote on the proposal before you, since it is not the same proposal shared with the public and voted on by the ZRB.
Thank you very much. Ms. Holliday, I'm being advised. Next up is Yashina Colbert Bradford. You listed your topic as transportation. I don't know if you're here for the Transportation Committee meeting or if you're here at all. Ms. Bradford? All right. Daisy Williams? And Margaret Boykin.
I hope that you will not vote on.
All right. That concludes public comment. Next up on our agenda is presentations. Colleagues, if there's no objection, we're going to take our legislative agenda first, and then we'll come back to the next presentation, and that takes us to section G, ordinances for first reading. Ms. Holmes, Director Holmes. Your topic is transportation. I don't know if you're here for the Transportation Committee.
Good morning, council members. Item number 1, 25-013-27, U2414, an ordinance by Zoning Committee for a special use permit.
And Margaret Boykin.
0051G for property located at 1425 Westview Drive Southwest.
Next up on our agenda is presentations. Colleagues, if there's no objection, we're going to take our... Thank you. That takes us to our regular agenda, section H, ordinances for second reading. Without objection, we can take items 2, 3, 4, 11, and 12 as a block.
Item number 2, 24-012-43, Z2420, an ordinance by Zoning Committee to rezone for residential general sector West Side Park by Zoning Committee for a special use permit. Residential general sector 3 West Side Park affordable workforce housing overlay for property located at 385 Westview Drive Southwest. Staff, NPU, and ZRB recommendation is approval. Item number 3, 25-010-20, Z2493, an ordinance by Zoning Committee to rezone from single family residential to single family.
You can take items 2, 3, 4, 11, and 12 as a block.
Item number 2, staff, NPU, and ZRB recommendation is approval. Item number 4, 24-010-63, Z2510, an ordinance by council members Dustin Hillis, Jason Dozier, Matt Westmoreland, Jason Winston, Liana Bakhtiari, Michael Julian Bond, Ishay Collins, Amir Faroki, Byron D. Amos, Alex Wan, Mary Norwood, Andre O. Boone, and Marcy Collier Overstreet, amending the zoning ordinance of the city of Atlanta to require special use permits for data centers, to provide certain use permits, application requirements to address the proposed data centers' water consumption, water conservation, energy consumption, and other environmental considerations, and for other purposes. Staff, NPU, and ZRB recommendation is approval. And item number 11, 24-015-86, Z2482, an ordinance by council member Jason H. Winston as substituted by Zoning Committee to amend the 1982 Atlanta zoning ordinance as amended by City of Atlanta Code of Ordinances, Part 16, Chapter 34, Section 1634. And Section 1634-28, so as to modify the provisions of the voluntary density bonus program in MRC zoning and for other purposes. Staff, NPU, and ZRB recommendation is approval. And Item number 12, 24-01705, Z-2484, a substitute ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from single-family residential to single-family residential for property located at 2428 Baker Road Northwest. Staff, NPU, and ZRB recommendation is approval.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Hillis.
Thank you. Speaking on the data center legislation, which I authored, just want to thank the planning staff and the law department and my colleagues for co-sponsoring it, as well as the MPUs who all reviewed it in the ZRB. And unfortunately had to learn the hard way in my district, as many other district council members have, about the burdens that data centers carry, not only on our neighborhoods, but on our electricity grid, our water system, et cetera. So looking forward to adopting this and moving forward where data centers across the city, where they're not already banned, would have to seek special use permits. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add on to Councilman Hillis, firstly, I want to thank him for continuing this fight. What's been amazing in the work that we started last year is that City of Atlanta is leading the country in pushing back against data centers propping up in our cities. And so it's been, I've been thankful to serve alongside y'all in this fight and along this ride, and I'm glad we get to put some more protection in place to serve our community. So with that, I'll make a motion to approve all the items.
I have a motion to approve items 2, 3, 4, 11, and 12, a second by Hillis. If there's no other discussion, after the most discussion we've had in 18 months.
Vote is open. The vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. Those items are approved. Next up, without objection, we can take items 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 13 as a block.
Item number 5, 24-01639, Z-2471, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from residential limited commercial conditional residential limited commercial for property located at 631 Flat Shoals Avenue Southeast. Staff and NPU recommendation is approval. ZRB recommendation is approval conditional. Item number 6, 25-01145, U-2506, an ordinance by zoning committee for a special use permit for a repair garage, paint, and body shop pursuant to ordinance 10-00041 for property located at 1997 DeLoe Drive Southwest. Staff and ZRB recommendation approval conditional. NPU recommendation is approval. Item number 7, 24-01201, U-2507, an ordinance by zoning committee for a special use permit for a music school pursuant to section 1606-0051B for property located at 1689 Hosea L. Williams Drive Southeast. Staff and ZRB recommendation is approval conditional. NPU recommendation is approval. Item number 8, 25-01202, U-2508, an ordinance by zoning committee for a special use permit for a community center pursuant to section 1611-0051N for property located at 122 Cleveland Avenue Southwest. Staff and ZRB recommendation is approval conditional. NPU recommendation is no recommendation. Item number 9, 24-01239, U-2505, an ordinance by zoning committee for a special use permit for outdoor amusement pursuant to section 1616-0051C for property located at 352 University Avenue Southwest. Staff and ZRB recommendations approval conditional. NP recommendation is approval. Item number 10, 25-01140, Z-24-100, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from residential limited commercial conditional to community business district for property located at 2870 Piedmont Road Northeast. Staff, NPU, and ZRB recommendation is approval conditional. And item number 13, 24-01695, Z-2521, an ordinance by Councilmember Howard Shook as substituted by zoning committee to waive the transitional height plan and transitional yard and screening requirements of the SPI 9 zoning district, Buckhead Village Special Public Interest District for property located at 505 Far Road Northeast to waive the variance requirement for reduction in the SPI 9 Buckhead Village Special Public Interest District regulations, transitional height plan, and transitional yard and screening requirements. Staff, NPU, and ZRB recommendation is approval conditional, and the request is to amend these items.
I'll make a motion to amend items 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 13 with the content in our packets. Second by Hillis. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, please open that vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. Those items are amended. If there's no other questions or comments, I'll make a motion to approve items 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 13 as amended. Second by Hillis. Please open that vote.
vote is open. And the vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. Those items are favorable as amended. Item number 14.
Item number 14, 25-01199, Z2513, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from single-family residential beltline overlay for property located at 1081 Sanders Avenue Southeast. Staff and ZRB recommendation is denial. MP recommendation is approval.
I'll make a motion to adverse. Second by Hillis.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. Item is adversed. Items without objection, items 15 to 26, 28, and 30 can be taken as a block, as the motion will be to refer to ZRB.
Item number 15, 25-01279, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from community business district conditional to community business district for property located at 801 Metropolitan Parkway Southwest. Item number 16, 25-01280, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from community business district conditional to community business district for property located at 805 Metropolitan Parkway. Item number 17, 24-01281, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from mixed residential commercial conditional beltline overlay to mixed residential commercial conditional beltline overlay for a change of conditions for property located at 1283 and 1295 Marietta Boulevard Northwest. Item number 18, 25-01282, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from two-family residential beltline overlay to multifamily multi-unit beltline overlay for property located at 696 Highland Avenue Northeast. Item number 19, 25-01283, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from heavy industrial Upper West Side overlay to multifamily residential Upper West Side overlay for property located at 1280 Chattahoochee Avenue Northwest. Item number 20, 25-01284, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from single-family residential to single-family residential for property located at 1942 Fremont Street Southeast. Item number 21, 25-01285, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from planned development housing to light industrial for property located at 2945 Forest Park Road Southeast. Item number 22, 25-01286, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from single-family residential conditional to single-family residential conditional for a change of conditions for property located at 1101 Church Street Northwest. Item number 23, 25-01287, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from single-family residential conditional to single-family residential conditional for a change of conditions for property located at 1103 Church Street Northwest. Item number 24, 25-01288, an ordinance by zoning committee for a special use permit for recovered materials processing facility pursuant to section 1616-0041Q for property located at 1484 Atlanta Industrial Way Northwest. Item number 25-01289, an ordinance by zoning committee for a special use permit for a daycare center pursuant to section 1608-0051B for property located at 3100 Northside Drive Northwest. Item number 26, 25-01290, an ordinance by zoning committee for a special use permit for a community center pursuant to section 1606A0051K for property located at 2028 Chicago Avenue Northwest. Item number 28, 25-01300, an ordinance by Councilmember Amir Faroki to amend the 1982 Atlanta zoning ordinance as amended by amending Chapter 20V, Ponce Highland Historic District to add convention centers as a prohibited use in the use table and for other purposes. 30, 25-01307, an ordinance by Councilmember Michael Julian Bond to waive provisions of Part 3 Code of Ordinances Land Development Code, Part 16 Zoning, Chapter 11 Community Business District Regulations, Section 1611-003, permitted principal uses and structures of the City of Atlanta Code of Ordinances for the purpose of waiving the distance requirements for a service station located at 2836 Lakewood Avenue Southwest and for other purposes.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will make a motion to refer items 15 through 26, 28, and 30 to the ZRB. Second by Dozier. Please open that vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. Those items are referred. Item number 27.
Item number 27, 25-01198, Z2503, an ordinance by zoning committee to rezone from single-family residential beltline overlay to the Kirkwood Commercial District beltline overlay for property located at 1138 Glenwood Avenue Southeast, and the request is to substitute this item.
I'll make a motion to substitute. Second by Dozier.
One moment. that vote is open. And the vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. The substitute is before us. If there are no questions or comments, I'll make a motion to approve on substitute. Second by Dozier.
The vote is open.
Five yeas, 0 nays. That item is approved on substitute. Item 29.
Item number 29, 25-01302, an ordinance by council members Andrea L. Boone, Dustin Hillis, Marcy Carter Overstreet, and Matt Westmoreland to amend the land use element of the 2021 Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 745 Bolton Road and parcel ID 14024-1003-0049 for single-family residential land use designation to the medium-density residential land use designation and for other purposes. The request is to hold this item.
Motion to hold. Second by Dozier.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. That item is held. Takes us to item number 35.
Item number 35, 24-01690, an ordinance by Councilmember Michael Julian Bond to amend the 1982 Atlanta zoning ordinance as amended to amend section 1626-003 entitled Conditions of Granting a Variance and to create a new section 1626-008 entitled Administrative Zoning Setback Variance for the preservation of trees and for other purposes. The request is to substitute this item.
I'll make a motion to bring forward the substitute. Second by Dozier.
The vote is open. That vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. The substitute is before us. I will now make a motion to rehold this item. Second by Hillis.
The vote is open. That vote is closed.
5 yeas, 0 nays. That item is held. That concludes our legislative agenda. It's not every day that we have the airport general manager at a zoning committee meeting. So wanted to acknowledge Mr. Ricky Smith in the back and wish him the best of luck as he delivers his first Department of Aviation quarterly report at the Transportation Committee meeting that will be beginning as soon as we conclude a zoning 2.0 update that I will turn.
It's a pleasure to bring before you an update of the zoning ordinance rewrite. And when we bring before you an update, that means we're getting ever closer to the city of Atlanta adopting new zoning regulations. We've been hard at work over the past couple of years, rewriting, redrafting, and being responsive to comments from our many stakeholders. And today we have before us Mr. Caleb Roscoe, who is with TSW and the consultant for the department.
Very much, Director Holmes, and good morning, everyone. I'm Caleb Roscoe, project manager for the consulting team with TSW. I do have another member with me this morning, Chrissy Dodson with Code Studio, who is also available to answer any questions you may have at the end. And then finally, another team member has While that is underway, we wanted to do a couple things this morning. First, we wanted to give you an update on what we have been doing since we met previously. We then wanted to talk about some of the big ideas from the zoning ordinance rewrite, and then finally conclude with next steps to let you know what we're going to be doing in the coming months. Now, in terms of progress, as Director Holmes has mentioned, we've been working on the zoning ordinance rewrite for nearly a decade now, directly or indirectly. The process began in 2016 with a diagnostic of the City of Atlanta zoning ordinance to identify technical areas of the code to potentially approve, and very importantly, to identify how to better align the code with the comprehensive plan. Since that point, it's been a very get where we are today, beginning with a series of quick fixes that were adopted in 2018, and then finally, starting in 2022, the process where we are now to actually write the full zoning ordinance. And what's really important is that we have approached this process going from a very general perspective, meaning starting with ideas, reviewing ideas with the community, gaining support for ideas, and only after that codifying. And so we've gone from very general and open-ended, and really the sky's the limit, to the very specific proposal point that we're at this morning. The other thing that's been really exciting about this process, as I'm sure you know, is we have been coordinating this rewrite effort very carefully with the comprehensive plan process. Ideally, zoning is the tool, the law that implements the comprehensive plan. So the City of Atlanta's decision to work on both of those efforts parallel has been truly important to this process, and I believe is going to result in a much stronger relationship between the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan, and a much stronger ability for the zoning ordinance to implement the comprehensive plan, which is incredibly important. So what have we been doing since our last briefing? Well, first of all, as you may have heard, we have released drafts of various what we're calling modules of the zoning ordinance. There have been 3 modules in the past year that really are groups of similar regulations. So, for example, there was a module on use standards, there was a module on form standards, and then there were modules on procedures and development standards. Now, the modules have been put out to the public as 85% drafts, meaning that we know that they are not fully fleshed out, but we wanted to put some ideas out to generate discussion, make feedbacks based on that, and get us some of the hard discussions, hard topic, hard conversations before we release the full draft of the ordinance. Now, with that said, we have emphasized that these modules are really the public's first opportunity to comment on the specifics of the zoning ordinance. Each module included a very robust engagement process. We had a in-person hybrid meeting for each of those modules where we introduced the module, we talked about what was in it, and then we allowed the public to ask any very general questions about the process. We then gave the public, several weeks to a month to actually review the document, submit questions to us, generate conversation online, and then followed that up with a very detailed, typically 2-hour Q&A session where Director Holmes and I and Christy just really answered any frequently asked questions that we received and then allowed the public to ask questions in real time. Additionally, we set up a pretty innovative online reviewing process that was used throughout the entirety of the process and will continue to be used for the next year, and I'll talk about that momentarily. Additionally, the modules were set up so that comments on earlier modules would influence later modules. So, for example, if you think about an issue such as a setback, the setback may depend on what the development standards are. It may depend on what the landscaping requirements are. So we really built this in such a way that earlier feedback could continually inform and inform later feedback. And we took public comments officially through the end of March of this year. Now, I am pleased to report that, in my opinion, as the city's zoning rewrite consultant project manager, I think we had tremendous feedback. We had nearly 35,000 people review the draft zoning ordinance. Now, we don't know if they read it all or if they just clicked on it and downloaded it and never did anything again, but we had nearly 35,000 views of that draft document, which I think is incredibly impressive. This is something that we monitor in all of our codes, and that is truly unprecedented. Additionally, we had 780 comments, it's actually a bit more now, submitted based on specific attributes of the code, specific sections using the Convio function, which I'll talk about in a moment. We also received a lot of emails. We had an email address set up, or people who knew Director Holmes or myself would just email us personally, nearly 240. And then very significantly, 1,500 folks attended the meetings and another 800 watched online. So very, very good comments for a zoning ordinance, which arguably can be a very, very dry topic. Now, by far and away, the bulk of the feedback was through this service called Conveo that we've been using for this process. This was a really, really neat document, very neat tool, where it allowed us to put every draft zoning regulation online. The public could read through the comments. They could then click to make a comment on a specific comment, and that allowed a couple of things. First, if they had a question, Director Holmes or myself or Christy were able to answer that technical question directly in the feedback. So, for example, people may be asking about how do you calculate floor area ratio? I actually got a question about that this morning. We explained it, and then members of the public who have a similar question can go in there and see it. So we answered about 800 of those comments online, and a lot of the community had conversations and discussions among themselves. Some people may have very strongly supported a recommendation, others may have not. So it was really useful to see. Additionally, because Atlanta is so geographically large, we had a couple of documents that really lended themselves to an exploratory map. So we created 3 maps where the public could basically go to a website, zoom in on their area of the city, and see what the potential regulations were for that. And very similar to Conveo, you were able to see other people's comments. You were able to allow folks to make a specific recommendation for a specific parcel. Just, I think, a really, really powerful tool for zoning decisions, which are very parcel-based at times. Now, with that said, I did want to mention that we did not take comments related to the actual zoning of a property. Director Holmes and myself have said since day one that we are not recommending significant changes to the zoning of individual properties. And what that means is if a property is zoned industrial today, it will be zoned industrial when the new zoning ordinance is adopted. If it is single family today, it will be a single family district when the new zoning is adopted. But what we are doing is we have a procedure set up, a sheet in the website that shows what the districts would be translated or renamed to. So we did get a lot of comments actually advocating for zoning changes. Again, we're not making any zoning changes, but we did share those with the comprehensive planning team because those are really indirectly also comprehensive planning comments. And then finally, the other thing that we got a lot of questions about was how we are handling zoning conditions. As you know from the agenda, a lot of times properties have very detailed negotiated zoning conditions with neighborhoods, with MPUs, with ZRB, and with this body. And so we are carrying forth all zoning conditions adopted from 2000 or later into the new zoning ordinance, and they will continue to be shown on the new zoning map. Director Holmes had one of her interns pull, 10,000 zoning conditions. And one of my staff people read through every single one of those documents. And so we're using that to determine, again, that the 2000 and later ones make sense to carry forward and that we're not missing anything inadvertently from before then. So with that said, what are some of the big ideas? And I'm not going to go through the whole zoning ordinance because it's pretty long. The first thing we've done is we've tried to make sure that the zoning ordinance is much more accessible to the general public. Code Studio are leaders in the country in terms of writing zoning ordinances that are clear, user-friendly, and quite frankly, written for the public, not attorneys. We do not believe that this zoning ordinance should be something that you have to hire an attorney to understand. And so we've tried to be absolutely clear from day one. We've had diagrams, we have tables, we have graphics, we have explanatory text. And hopefully, if you've looked at it, you've come to the same conclusion that it's much easier to understand. Additionally, and this is a really big one, is we've written a zoning ordinance that continues to reflect the unique character of Atlanta's neighborhoods. This is not a zoning code that we've borrowed from Denver or Raleigh or Dallas or Charlotte. This is specifically written for the city of Atlanta, and I can't emphasize that enough. This is specifically written for the city of Atlanta. We have put in place recommendations that continue to preserve existing patterns, especially in the neighborhoods. I know you hear from your constituents quite often about neighborhood character, and we've incorporated a lot of recommendations that do that in this code. And very importantly, I would argue we've improved the design attributes in areas where change is intended to occur. Places like the major commercial corridors, Campbellton Road, Metropolitan Parkway, Northside Drive, Cascade Road, downtown Atlanta, so that if a neighborhood wants to preserve the character, the zoning has better tools for that. And if a neighborhood wants to support walkable, mixed use, more transit-friendly development in other areas, there are also better tools for that. And to that end, one of the key takeaways of this rewrite has been to really get away from this idea that certain neighborhoods should have stronger zoning protections than others. We have strived to make sure that there are citywide basic standards that regulate certain problematic uses. We just heard about data centers, but also fuel stations, drive-throughs, self-storage, et cetera. Those types of uses, which today can have different standards, whether they're an SPI or they're a historic district or in the Beltline overlay, we're leveling the playing field for all of that so that every neighborhood has the same protections under the new code. Additionally, we've incorporated citywide streetscape standards. Walkability is very important in most of the city. There are some R1 through R3 where it's not quite as important, but in most of the more urban and walkable areas of the city, extremely important. We've incorporated urban design standards, as I mentioned before. And then there has been a little bit of consolidation of the zoning districts. I believe, Director Holmes, we are at almost 270 zoning districts today. Through a lot of back and forth between us, the public, the internal team, we've reduced it significantly and at the same time have not compromised the intent. Now, with that said, the way we've done that is this idea of changing how the zoning ordinance is organized, how a zoning district is organized. Today, neighborhoods typically have one flavor of, for example, R1, R2, R3, R4, or R5. What we've done as part of this rewrite is used what we're calling a modified zone string approach, where a zoning district is broken into two pieces. There is the form, which is the physical layout, building height, setback, windows, porch requirements, that sort of thing. And there is the use of property. So together, when those are put together on the zoning map, those actually constitute your use district. And what's really exciting about that is that it allows a neighborhood that wants a specific form. For example, this happens to be Adair Park, a lovely home in Adair Park. But if there was a neighborhood that wanted this house form, but wanted it to be commercial or wanted it to be multifamily, the only thing they need to change is the use package, the use district. So it is a really easy way to make policy changes at a neighborhood scale without having to create an SPI or write a whole new zoning district somewhere down the road. So how would that look? This is R4 today. The R4 district, which is a single family district, converts to an H6, which is a house scale district, one dwelling, and then R2, which is a residential household living plus one accessory dwelling unit. So again, it'll look different initially, it'll take a while to get used to, but we feel very, very strongly that this is a powerful tool to allow neighborhoods to customize, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on it, especially in neighborhoods that want to make little incremental changes to the use packages. So a couple of other things related to the zone string idea is it does give us an ability to create new zoning districts to better implement the comprehensive plan. You may have been following the comprehensive plan process and you notice that there are some new development patterns for what are calling residential flex areas, which are areas that may look like houses but have a commercial character. Classic example is Carroll Street in Cabbagetown. There's not too much of it in the comp plan, but now we have zoning tools that could actually implement that better one day down the road if council wants to change the zoning map. So those are really the big ideas. Now, those have been vetted with the public. We have received, in my opinion, very strong positive feedback. And so now we're at a point in the process where Christy and myself and Director Holmes are preparing these 3 modules and converting them into the first discussion draft of the zoning ordinance. This will be the first 100% complete copy of the zoning code. It'll all be packaged, it'll all be internally laid out, and it will be published for additional community review. We'll go through a series of feedback exercises on that draft, and only after that process has occurred will we recommend the adoption process to begin. Now, with that said, there is a very, very important next step. In fact, probably the most important next step of the coming year, and that is called testing. We have received many comments related to the specific application of the proposed zoning ordinance, either on real developments or on real sites and neighborhoods or on hypothetical developments in the city. And so one of the consultant team anticipated that this would happen. And so in our proposal, we included funding for what we're calling zoning testing. And what this basically involves is the consultant team working with Office of Zoning and Development staff to actually review recent development projects against the new zoning code. Review them as if the new zoning code was in place. This will allow us to do a couple of things. First, and very importantly, it will begin to share the workings of the zoning ordinance with the staff that are going to administer it on a day-to-day basis. It will then also allow us to make sure that we didn't miss anything, that there are no provisions that have a negative result, or that there are no provisions that are not quite as clear as they should be. Again, Director Holmes, Christy, and myself have been sort of in this day to day, but we also want to make sure that the staff who administer the code and review the code, that they're interpreting it the same way as we are. Additionally, this will allow us to respond to a lot of the concerns that we have heard from the development community. We have received a couple of emails from both individual developers and development organizations, and we want to make sure that, first of all, their concerns are justified, that they're not necessarily misunderstanding how the code is applied, and that there are no unintended consequences. And so we'll be going through that in the coming months. Additionally, what this will do is allow us to determine if there are additional variation procedures that are needed, or if the design outcomes are intended, and really to identify a final round of potential updates. We don't think that there will be a lot of huge changes, but we hope that we'll find some areas where we can clarify the text and make it more user-friendly. And so that will begin later this summer. Again, we're working with Director Holmes to finalize the process for that. Our goal is then to have a complete 100% draft of the ordinance at the end of the year for consideration early next year under the future City Council. So that concludes my presentation, and I would love to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you both for the presentation and the work. Any questions? Mr. Hillis?
Just a few quick questions, and this may or may not even be addressed in the zoning 2.0 update, but how does this update handle administrative waivers?
Great point. So this is a very nuanced question, but today, administrative variations, as they're called, are available in the Beltline overlay. They are available in certain other overlays, including the Upper West Side, which I know your area includes, and they're available in what are called quality of life districts. We are recommending standardizing the administrative variation process citywide by creating 3 separate types of variation. The first type of variation is called an administrative modification, which is a very, very, very minor administrative variance based on specific criteria. Usually it's 10% of a number. So if you're in a neighborhood and there's a setback is 10 feet, Director Holmes can vary that 1 foot, basically. That is pretty typical everywhere in the state of Georgia. It's built in and pretty common. And very importantly, those things cannot be created by the applicant. The applicant cannot say, I'm going to build my house in the wrong location intentionally and know that I can get a waiver for it. We've borrowed some language from Decatur that prevents that. So that's citywide, but very limited in application. The second thing we're doing is we are continuing administrative variations, which again are staff approvals, but we are really tightening where and when they're allowed. So every single provision in the zoning ordinance will specify how much administrative variation may be granted by staff. Today, in a quality of life district or an overlay or an SPI, staff can completely eliminate requirements. That puts a great deal of pressure on staff, and that doesn't always have the intended result. So we've tightened that up, typically to 30% of a number, and we've said anything beyond that has to go to BZA. So we're going from different standards citywide to a citywide administrative modification, which is very minor, typically 10% or less. Administrative variation, typically 30% or less, and then anything more has to go to the BZA. Additionally, there are posting requirements. I know some of your MPUs have commented about the facts that a lot of times administrative variations may be granted and there's no notification of that. Our legal counsel has recommended actually requiring notification of administrative variations with a posting on the property, which would be a new change. That way MPUs know about it, people driving by may know about it, and will certainly not comment if they wanted to appeal the administrative decision. There's very clear notice of it.
Well, I'd like to have some more discussion offline with your team and maybe even Director Holmes. I see these, I don't know, fairly often, but there's one in particular that I have to see every day and I don't believe should have ever happened. But, you know, before I was on council, my neighborhood worked very hard to pass some new zoning on our arterial and collector streets. And there are approximately 5 new townhome developments on these collector streets. And for whatever reason, one of them was granted a sidewalk variance where they could use the existing sidewalk that I believe currently has about 4 or 5 curb cuts in it. And it's just going to stay that way because they were granted a variance. And that doesn't make sense to me.
Great point. On the issues of sidewalks, we have, if you want to get into the details of the code, at the beginning of both module of chapter 3 and chapter 8, there's this really neat table now that shows exactly what activities trigger sidewalk requirements and other requirements. And the situation you describe would probably, given that, would probably be something that would have to go to BZA now. But we've spent a lot of attention on sidewalk issues. We've coordinated that with existing topography because I know a lot of your sites also have very high retaining walls. So we would love to continue the conversation with you to make sure that we've reflected your concerns.
And 3 other things, I'm going to say them all at once and you can summarize them and we can follow up later because I know we have another committee to get to, at least me and Councilman Overstreet. And Mr. Dozier, how does this handle, number 1, existing SPIs, 2, ADUs, and a totally separate question, you talked about testing this against potential new developments, but one thing I know I would like to know is how would specific developments that already exist, would those even be allowed under this zoning change, or what would have to change for them to be built under the new zoning change?
So the first question is very easy. Most of the SPIs are converted into the new zone string. I say most because not all. Midtown remains, SPI 16 remains. They just had all these very unique provisions that are found nowhere else in the city that we've converted them to what we're calling a legacy district, which means that they'll continue to be in the zoning ordinance. The 2 in Buckhead remain, 9 and 12. Buckhead Village and Lennox MARTA Station, and then Greenbrier Mall remains and Fort McPherson remain. So we would have 5 SPIs that continue to exist, but they're going to be called legacy districts. The second question regarding ADUs, we are not changing anything. We are not increasing the number of ADUs allowed in certain districts. We're not decreasing it. There was an earlier proposal to increase it to 2 in certain areas. Director Holmes and myself received hundreds of letters opposing that, and so we've gone back to the status quo. So if you're R4, 5, or 5 today, you basically get 1. If you're R1 through R3, you get none, but you continue to have a guest house, which we've renamed to an accessory residential structure. And then the final question is, if you have specific properties in question, please let Director Holmes know. We haven't identified any yet. I do envision that some of the more recent development that is under construction, including, I know, several on Huff Road in your area that might be good candidates, that we do intend on looking at those. But provide specific opportunities to Director Holmes, please.
Right, well, if no one has noticed, Chair Westmoreland has stepped out, and I'm the vice chair of the committee. So any other questions? Councilmember Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Good to see you, Caleb, as always.
Likewise.
Just one question I have for you. I'm really interested in some of the commentary you made earlier about the various corridors and opportunities to think differently in terms of how we build corridors for the future. I know I have a couple folks in the room who are on the MLK corridor, who's part of the Georgia Main Streets program. We also have Ralph David Abernathy, that's also part of the Atlanta Main Streets program. I wonder if there's an opportunity to connect with those groups directly and maybe just separate from the community engagement that y'all been doing, publicly work with some of these organizations that are championing these Main Street programs to think about how they can use these new zoning tools as a way to get to the vision that they want to see happen. So that's less of a question about 2.0, but more of a way thinking about how we can get the proposals and the plan out in front of community in a little bit different way than we maybe have been doing before.
Councilmember Dozier, I can actually speak to that. So at the Department of City Planning, after City Council adopts the Comprehensive Development Plan, the Office of Design in our department will start small area plans. And they will be working with our staff members in Office of Housing Community Development that work directly with the Main Street programs and many neighborhoods across the city to create small area plans. And they'll be using some of the tools that we've identified in our zoning ordinance 2.0 to help neighborhoods plan for their futures.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You're off the hook.
Any other questions, colleagues? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I believe that completes the agenda and our presentation. So we are adjourned by unanimous consent of members formerly present.